In its infancy, Chicago adopted the motto, Urbs in Horto. That's Latin for city in a garden, and it still fits today. Visionary leaders at the turn of the 20th century preserved thousands of acres of surrounding forest and natural areas as the booming city grew. Some forest preserves have benefited from a little cosmetic surgery. Like the SKOKIE lagoons, they were carved out of flood-prone swampland by the Depression-era Civilian Conservation Corps. The crown jewel of the Cook County Forest Preserve District is the 385-acre Chicago Botanic Garden, just north of the SKOKIE lagoons in Glencoe. It opened in 1972 and has been growing like weeds, well, better than weeds, ever since, with 27 gardens, 9 islands, and 4 natural areas. So the city is in a garden, but what about gardens in the city? Jackson Park, on the south side, was one of several large pleasure grounds that public health reformers campaigned to create in the mid-1800s, as Chicago was bursting at the seams. To design this park, the proud city sought out the most famous landscape architects in the country, Frederick Law Olmsted and Calvert Vaux. Inspired by the dunny lakefront setting, they designed a water-oriented park with meandering lagoons. Even before they'd finished, Jackson Park was chosen to host the 1893 World's Fair, and Olmsted went back to the drawing board. He and Chief Fair designer Daniel Burnham laid out a neoclassical dreamland of grand white pavilions set among waterways and punctuated with statuary by the world's greatest sculptors. But the palaces were made of plaster and not meant to last. Today, only a few traces of the fair remain. Like Wooded Island, which was a rustic retreat in the middle of the bustling exposition. The island was home to the Japanese pavilion modeled on Phoenix Hall in Kyoto, dating from the year 1052, an exemplar of classical Japanese architecture. Sadly, arsonists destroyed it at the end of World War II. Today, OSAKA Garden and a smaller pavilion preserve the Japanese heritage. And none other than Yoko Ono added to that heritage in 2016 with her sculpture SKYLANDING, inspired by a phoenix rising from the ashes. The formal centerpiece of the fair was the Court of Honor, with the towering Statue of the Republic by renowned sculptor Daniel Chester French. Like the pavilions, it was made of plaster, and it's long gone. This is a 1/3 size replica, erected not far from the original site, with funds left over from the fair. The Museum of Science and Industry is the lone fair pavilion still standing. Unlike other fair buildings, it had sturdy brick walls behind the plaster facade. Because it was the Palace of Fine Arts, housing treasures from around the world. After the fair, it became the first field museum, displaying a vast array of artifacts left behind by exhibitors. That collection moved to a brand new field museum downtown in the early 1920s, and the abandoned old palace fell into ruin. Enter Sears chairman Julius Rosenwald, He pledged $3 million to restore the building as an interactive museum of industry and technology. Jackson Park is just one of several large showcase parks on the south and west sides, dating from the mid-1800s. One of America's first boulevard systems connects these parks together. It's a chain of leafy parkways forming a winding green corridor through the dense city. Today, the boulevards and parks have been beautifully restored. The chief landscape designer of Garfield Park and the other big West Side parks, Humboldt and Douglas, was Civil War veteran William LeBaron Jenney, who would later be credited with designing the world's first skyscraper. In the early 1900s, renowned landscape architect Jens Jensen took over the West Side parks, adding his revolutionary use of native plants that came to be called the prairie style of landscape design. Jensen's Garfield Park Conservatory opened in 1906. It's one of the world's largest greenhouses. Jensen designed it in the shape of a Midwestern haystack.